Today, thousands of young Americans are entering the armed forces, but many others are being rejected. Easy to detect are the physical ills which disqualify a man. Much less obvious are the sicknesses of the mind, yet they are fully as grave and as alarming. Rejected by the armed forces, an emotionally unstable individual is turned back into society, to become lost again, one among the nearly 7 million Americans suffering from some form of emotional or mental ill health. Today, mental illness is by way of becoming America's #1 health problem. For years, what was called insanity was regarded as a problem for each state to solve as best it could. In nearly all state mental hospitals, little more than custodial care was provided. Few who were committed could hope to return to society. Shocked by the appalling percentage of the emotionally unstable revealed by the World War II draft figures, Congress in 1946 passed the National Mental Health Act, which recognized for the first time that mental illness was a national problem. Witness to the government's intention to act is a huge modern building going up at Bethesda, Maryland, to house, among other groups, the National Institute of Mental Health, created by the National Mental Health Act. Keenly aware of the tremendous problems ahead is Dr. Robert H. Felix, director of the vast new project.
A primary objective of the National Mental Health Program is to increase our fund of scientific knowledge about mental health and about mental illness. Meanwhile, we should make full use of existing knowledge. We're not doing this. Why? Because there are not enough community mental health services, because there is not enough public understanding of the importance of mental health, and because there are all too few skilled mental health workers.
Largest U.S. training center for mental health workers is Topeka, Kansas, where 3 separate hospitals cooperate in an intensive program. Located at Topeka is the famed Menninger Clinic. Its teaching staff makes possible a 3-year training course for about 100 doctors who use the facilities of the cooperating hospitals. Dr. William C. Menninger, General Secretary of the Menninger Foundation, was Chief of Neuropsychiatry for the U.S. Army during World War II. His brother, Dr. Carl A. Menninger, is a trustee of the foundation and is Director of Education. Training is available not only for doctors, but also for other psychiatric personnel. To Topeka has also come the Veterans Administration, which cooperates in the effort to build up adequate personnel. Winter Hospital, with 1,400 beds, is one of its largest training hospitals. Psychiatric nurses and psychiatric aides spend more time with patients than any other members of the hospital staff. Their role is major, and their professions grow in stature year by year. To be eligible for training as a psychiatrist, the doctor must be a graduate of an approved medical school and must have completed 1 year of general internship in an approved hospital. Working closely with the psychiatrist is the clinical psychologist, who contributes special skills and knowledge to the diagnosis and treatment of mental and emotional disorders. While the psychiatrist seldom gives these tests, which determine a patient's mental capacity and provide understanding of his mental problems, he must have a working knowledge of them and their evaluation. As his training progresses, the young psychiatrist learns the various techniques which will be at his disposal and how to use them. Among these are such physical methods as electric shock. Electric shock is used most frequently to relieve depression. Another form of physical treatment is the administration of insulin. Patients so sick they cannot even talk are frequently able to cooperate with the doctor after insulin injections. Properly used, such treatment has helped extreme cases of anxiety.
The insulin produced a dramatic fall in blood sugar, and the brain was briefly deprived of an essential ingredient for normal physiological function. The patient began to sweat profusely, and as the blood sugar fell, major convulsions followed.
In certain chronic illnesses, brain surgery may be indicated. A chemical such as sodium amytal is often administered by the psychiatrist in order to enable the patient to overcome an emotional block. It must be just enough to put the patient into a state between sleep and waking, so that he may be able to express his feelings more freely. Many persons think that psychiatry consists of only one thing, psychoanalysis. Actually, psychoanalysis is a prolonged and very specialized form of treatment. It properly can be given only by a doctor qualified as a psychiatrist and fully trained in the exact specialty of psychoanalysis. Treatment may go on for years.
On today's cover story, electroshock therapy, once seen as an outdated, even barbaric procedure, is now seeing a bit of a resurgence. NBC's Mara Scavacampo has more. Mara, good morning.
Matt, good morning. Well, today it's called electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT for short. You may be surprised to learn that an estimated 100,000 Americans undergo the procedure every year. And for many, the experience is much different than what you might think. These are the images often associated with electroshock therapy, portrayed by Hollywood as painful, violent, and archaic. But for Denise Stewart, the experience was life-saving.
There would be voices in my head that would sit there and say, Denise, see the knife in the kitchen? Cut your wrist. Denise, see those pills over there? Take all those pills.
When antidepressants only made her condition worse, her doctors turned to ECT.
If it hadn't been for the electroconvulsive therapy, I wouldn't be alive right now.
And she's not alone. Stories like Denise's are helping ease the stigma from ECT, transforming it into a widely accepted treatment for mental illnesses like depression and bipolar disorders. Today, an ECT treatment typically involves a series of sessions lasting a few seconds each. Patients are sedated and don't feel a thing, and doctors say it's sometimes more effective than antidepressant medications. But there are negative side effects, such as memory loss, something Stewart admits struggling with. Still, she says the therapy has brought her and her family a sense of hope. ECT is backed by the American Psychiatric Association, the American Medical Association, and the Surgeon General. And experts also say that for some patients, it can be the difference between being institutionalized and leading a normal life. Matt?
All right, Mara, thank you very much. Dr. Nancy Snyderman is NBC's chief medical editor. Nancy, good morning to you. You know there are people who just watch that, who say, okay, it's effective, it can be life-changing, but I still can't get past the stigma.
We can't get past the stigma of all the visuals we've seen from movies and the fact that it seems so antiquated when you consider modern medicine. But time and time and time again, if you look at patients who have severe depression who don't respond to medications, they will tell you that ECT works. This is not something that institutionalized medicine like the American Medical Association is keeping in just to dig its heels in. They're saying, the AMA says, it works, it's safe, therefore we should still do it.
ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, involves the application of 2 electrodes to the head to pass electricity through the brain with the goal of causing an intense seizure or convulsion. The process always damages the brain, resulting each time in a temporary coma and often a flatlining of the brain waves, which is a sign of impending brain death. After 1, 2 or 3 ECTs, the trauma causes typical symptoms of severe head trauma or injury including headache, nausea, memory loss, disorientation, confusion, impaired judgment, loss of personality, and emotional instability. These harmful effects worsen and some become permanent as routine treatment progresses. ECT originated in 1938. Modifications have been used since the 1960s and are not new or safer. These changes make it harder to cause a seizure. As a result, modern ECT requires even stronger and more damaging doses of electricity. ECT works by damaging the brain. The initial trauma can cause an artificial euphoria which ECT doctors mistakenly call an improvement. After several routine ECTs, the damaged person becomes increasingly apathetic, indifferent, unable to feel genuine emotions, and even robotic. Memory loss and confusion worsen. This helpless individual becomes unable to voice distress or complaints, and becomes docile and manageable. ECT doctors mistakenly call this an improvement, but it indicates severe and disabling brain injury.
Is it a one-time thing, or do patients have to keep going back?
Depends. Most patients will have a series of a few, and then we'll see then how they do. But Mara pointed to the most important thing is the short-term memory loss is real. Some people will really have that.
But you will regain the memory?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You're not going to lose the memory of who you are and what you've done in life, but you may forget what you had for dinner last night.
Unfortunately, it wiped out good memories. It wiped out my teenage years. I was shown photographs of me at a wedding. I was shown photographs of me at a party. And I had no idea where it was, when it was. I couldn't even believe that I'd been there. So there was dramatic changes in my memory. And I disliked the fact that happy memories were erased. I do believe that I lost the person that I was completely. And there weren't enough people around to remind me of who I was. So I lost myself completely. Lost touch with friends, lost touch with everything. Social groups I'd been part of, things I used to do, lost touch with the lot.
ECT permanently impairs memory and causes other long-term signs of mental dysfunction such as difficulties with concentration and new learning. Memories of important past experiences are commonly impaired or eradicated, including weddings, birthdays, vacations, educational experiences, and housekeeping or professional skills. Sense of self or identity can be demolished, and family members often report that their loved one was never the same again. Follow-up studies show that ECT has been used to abuse women by making them docile and submissive.
No, you're not going to lose the memory of who you are and what you've done in life, but you may forget what you had for dinner last night. That's short-term memory.
That can be a real major side effect for a lot of people.
But then you have your day's activities that come and replenish it. So yes, I get it. There's nothing that we give people in the psychiatric world that doesn't have a side effect, and the powerful medications included.
Forget the diagnosis for a second. You say it works with bipolar and depression. What about the patient in terms of age, gender? Does that matter?
Well, increasingly, we've started looking at pre-adolescents, adolescents. For years, it was just adults. But as we've tried to figure out obsessive-compulsive disorder, bipolar, and severe depression, when medications don't work, you and I have talked about medicinal marijuana in the past, other things, I think the whole body of medicine has to be stretched. I'm not pro-ECT. I'm pro-using things correctly when nothing else works.
In specific circumstances.
Yeah, I think doctors will always try medication and therapy first. But if it means institutionalizing someone versus sending them back to having a real life, yes.
But
What
your
I say
point is
ECT,
this is more of a last resort.
Yeah, well, it's never a first-line resort. But does it work? The answer is yes.
Nancy
I've seen it work.
Thanks so much.
You bet, Matt.
Appreciate it.
ECT is not a last resort because it does not work and can ruin recovery. ECT does not prevent suicide, but can cause it. Controlled clinical trials show that ECT has no more benefit than sham ECT, anesthesia with no shock. ECT blunts emotional life during the acute phase of brain injury for about 4 weeks, after which the person remains depressed with the added affliction of brain damage. Abundant evidence indicates that ECT should be banned. Because ECT destroys the ability to protest, all ECT quickly becomes involuntary and thus inherently abusive and a human rights violation. Therefore, when ECT has already been started, concerned relatives or others should immediately intervene to stop it, if necessary with an attorney.
And now to the United States and the story of a deadly passion for pills. Today, more Americans die from prescription drugs than car accidents. It's shocking data coming from the National Center for Health Statistics. And as RT's Marina Portnaya reports, there's concern that pharmaceutical firms are more focused on profit than that of people's lives.
America is regarded as a country with a ravenous appetite for consumption. Today, a widespread fondness for pharmaceuticals has turned the U.S. into a nation of pill poppers.
Bipolar depression doesn't have to consume you. Here's me, and here's my depression.
You know when you feel the weight of sadness. You may feel exhausted, hopeless, and anxious.
According to the U.S. government, antidepressant use among Americans has increased nearly 400% in the past 2 decades. Published reports find that 1 in 5 adults take at least one drug for mental health disorders. With over $14 billion in annual sales, antipsychotics remain America's top-selling therapeutic class of prescription drugs.
This is a medical journal.
Dr. Harriet Fraud believes Big Pharma has manufactured a climate of insanity by manipulating and even creating illness for capital gain.
The advertising strategy is to have vague diagnoses and then find wiggle room so that they apply to everybody.
Last year, prescription drug abuse became the #1 cause of accidental death, with more than 30,000 Americans overdosing.
It can consume you.
Seroquel, a bipolar medication, generated $4.4 billion in sales last year. Listing all its side effects requires 49 seconds of airtime.
High blood sugar has been reported with Seroquel XR and medicines like it, and in extreme cases can lead to coma or death.
The number of children consuming antipsychotic medication doubled in the past decade. Millions of American adolescents are taking drugs like Adderall, doled out by doctors to treat hyperactivity. Pfizer, America's most profitable pharmaceutical company, makes antidepressants not only for people, but also for animals. In 2009, the pharma giant paid $2.3 billion to settle civil and criminal allegations over illegally marketing one of its drugs. It was the largest healthcare fraud settlement and criminal fine to ever been paid by a U.S. drug company. That being said, the money reportedly amounted to less than 3 weeks' worth of Pfizer drug sales.
The money is so huge that the fines are immaterial, and they're not thinking about the social effects of what they're doing. They're thinking about the profits they accrue.
The pharmaceutical industry remains the most profitable business in the U.S. More success and financial gain for the companies will always remain possible as long as more Americans are encouraged to take drugs. Marina Portnaya, RT, New York.
It's no secret that a growing number of Americans are taking antidepressants. An estimated 30 million people take at least one. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, the rate of antidepressant use has increased nearly 400% in the past 2 decades. The statistics, however, do not include the youngest group of patients being treated with psychotropic drugs. RT's Marina Portnaya brings us more about this alarming trend.
America has long been dubbed Prozac Nation for its heavy use of psychiatric medication. According to the Mayo Clinic, antidepressants are the most prescribed medications after antibiotics. And now a startling new finding shows that children, so young they still sleep in their cribs, are being treated with antipsychotics. According to the prescription data company IMH Health, 20,000 prescriptions for drugs commonly used to treat depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder were written for children 2 years old or younger last year, a 50% increase from the year before. The research commissioned by the New York Times doesn't indicate how many children received the prescriptions. One child may have received more than one prescription, and we don't know the exact condition for which these prescriptions were written. There's been no clinical trials or published research on how antipsychotic medication could affect the brains of children under the age of 2. The reason? Well, experts say it would be too risky to even conduct a clinical trial on kids so young. Now, some experts interviewed by the Times presume that parents and doctors use the psychotropic medications to treat behavior problems like temper tantrums, which almost anyone would say is normal for a baby or toddler. But no medical professional has been able to justify the use of these type of drugs for young children who can't even form full sentences yet or may still wear diapers. Now, we need to be clear by saying that just because a prescription was written for a young child doesn't confirm that it was actually consumed. However, critics say that the pure fact that we're seeing younger and younger Americans, now babies, being advised to take medication indicates just how much drugs have become a first resort for many doctors. Marina Portnaya, RT, Miami.
Well, you know, I think that most Americans would agree that there is an over-prescribing trend going on here. You know, when you talk about how many millions of kids are on some sort of mood-altering or psychotropic medication, and the fact that if you're in the United States, you have 3 times the chance of being put on something than you do from any European country. I think the U.S. uses 5 times as much Ritalin for kids as all the other countries combined. But the notion that aren't there PET scans and brain scans and MRI that show that there is something biological going on in the minds of some of these children?
Absolutely not. It's a complete fraud. There are no studies that show any kind of brain abnormality in children until they have taken these drugs. And then once you administer these drugs to children, you start to see damage to the brain, all kinds of cognitive problems, and then you also see many physical problems that these drugs cause. And there's absolutely, I believe absolutely no evidence that these drugs help children in the long run. And in fact, they really hurt children's long-term prospects dramatically.
In Tucson, Arizona, Aurora, Colorado, Newtown, Connecticut, President Obama and gun control advocates called for a ban on assault weapons. But is it really the guns that are the problem? Mental health professionals have said that in all these cases, the shooters were on some kind of prescription medication. My next guest says it just might be the pills that are the problem. Joining me now is psychiatrist and author of Medication Madness, The Role of Psychiatric Drugs in Cases of Violence, Suicide, and Crime, Dr. Peter Breggin. And Doctor, I love your message, and that's why I asked you to come on the show, because I think you have touched on something that is fascinating to me, is the fact that there are these psychotic drugs out there, and we'll give the audience your opinion about them. I've heard you talk about this before.
Well, there's no doubt that psychiatric drugs can cause violence, and the most widely used ones, including particularly the antidepressants, the newer ones like Prozac and Paxil and Celexa, and also the benzodiazepines, the tranquilizers like Xanax and Klonopin, and then also the stimulant drugs we give to children, all of them have a significant association with violence. If you take a look at all the reports to the FDA about drug violence, all the drugs that we use, most of them, the vast majority, have no association with violence. And then those three groups I just mentioned, the psychiatric drugs, have many, many more times the number of reports of violence. So it's clearly established.
But you have somebody that comes to you and they are mentally ill. What do you do? Because a lot of doctors will just, get out the old prescription pad and write a prescription. I've heard you talk about the fact that you've been doing this for decades and that you have cured a lot of mental illnesses with zero drugs.
Well, I don't think in terms of curing mental illnesses, Tom, as much as I think of helping people overcome their problems, helping people overcome their anguish, their pain, their anger, their suffering. And in my experience, and I think this is the absolute truth, what really helps people is a good, solid, caring relationship with somebody. And a therapist or psychiatrist, I'm a psychiatrist, who says, in effect, you can take charge of your life. You can be responsible for your life. You can learn how to handle your emotions. You can learn to live by better values. But that's not the current approach in psychiatry. You'll hear nothing in psychiatry about taking charge of your life, taking responsibility, or living by values. Instead, psychiatry turns people into machines and says, you have a biochemical imbalance, which is untrue. We've got a drug that can cure the biochemical imbalance, which is untrue. And those things make people feel more helpless and more out of control. So I think we need to get back to good, solid human relationship as a way of helping people.
Are you persona non grata at the Psychiatric Association meetings?
Well, I suppose I might even be subject to violence since we're talking about that. Yes, psychiatry is just a handmaiden now of the pharmaceutical industry. If you go to one of the big psychiatric meetings, it's going to a drug company carnival. They pay for everything. Psychiatry, our journals are paid for by the drug companies. Our meetings are paid for by the drug companies. And we make a lot of money by doing 10-minute med checks. You do a lot more financially that way than by sitting and talking with somebody. Psychiatry has lost its way, and I do think that the shootings really very much involve psychiatric drugs. I was an expert in cases surrounding Eric Harris from Columbine. I got to really look at his medical records, and you can see him deteriorating while taking an antidepressant, Luvox, and he had it in his bloodstream when he committed the violence.
Well, beyond the common thread of, a lot of people say, well, these shootings, the guns have been the common thread. You're talking about, yeah, but there's also psychotic drugs are a common thread. I have a man I used to work with, sadly. I mean, father of the year, great guy, smart guy, but I didn't know he suffered from depression. They changed some medication on him. He went home and he stabbed to death his two little daughters. And he says to this day, he's in prison in North Carolina, he says it was because of the fact that the drugs made him do it. I never heard that argument before, but that seems to be yours.
Oh, well, there's no question about it. I've been involved in a case where a man on his second day of Paxil drowned his two children in a bathtub and drowned himself. There's a lot of cases like this. A woman who murdered one of her children and tried to murder another one on Zoloft. So this which is an antidepressant. So there's no lack of cases about this, and I've looked at them in depth in Medication Madness, Tom. I have 50 cases where I've seen the medical records and interviewed people if they were alive, interviewed families where suicide and violence was a major theme. So these are very serious problems.
Well, I'm just glad you're talking out about it. I'm glad you're speaking out about this. I wanted to give you the forum here to do it on this program, too, because I think your message is worth listening to, and a lot of people don't hear it. So, Dr. Peter Breggin, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.